Jeff is a 10X alumnus, a speaker. He showed up at my ill-fated MDTX event back in 2018. It wasn't ill-fated, the event was fine, but it was not a 10X event as far as I'm concerned. It was an effort to collaborate with a multi-billion-dollar company that really wanted to sell booths and exhibitor space. And friends of 10X know that's just not what I'm about. So, but Jeff gave us a superlative presentation. I have it recorded. I think I published it. I'm not sure. I'll have to look, and I can make it available here on this call. But you are working on something new. And after you, Jeff and Miranda and friends came to last week's presentation with JD Friedland, he said, you know, we caught up, and he said, I'm working on something really exciting. Let me tell you about it. And I said, wait, don't tell me about it. Tell everybody about it so that I can respond with the same oohs and ahs as everyone else as they do. So with that auspicious setup, ladies and gentlemen, Jeffrey Carlisle has something to say.
Joe, thank you very much. Yeah, rather than make a presentation of any sort, I thought it'd be best to just engage in a conversation and see if you agree that we're following the right kinds of trends and approaches to attack a big problem. The title of today's hour is Addressing the Nurse Staffing Crisis with Technologies. So we want to approach this from a holistic point of view. I think that I'd like to, by way of background, to share with you, my last 50 years of product development in medical devices. Starting in 1997, I worked with the Harvard apparatus and filed my first patent for an infusion pump back then, which is a kind of a hybrid controller pump. But it was one of the first medical devices ever with the thing called what do we call it? A microprocessor. It was very early on days. But I went to work with HP and got involved in cardiography and then various aspects of cardiology, and then started a division at Bard in cardiac electrophysiology. I then worked with Dean Kamen on a number of projects, but led the Baxter Home Choice peritoneal design, and then got back into IV therapy with FluidSense, which had a real fun run in partnership with HCA, but we kind of fell apart in the. I don't want to belabor the point, except that I've got 50 years of medical device work and been in and out of infusion therapy or related fields like peritoneal dialysis for a while, and we constituted Pneuma Systems to take another run at it with an entirely new set of technologies. And I'm joined by a group of people who have got vast experience in acute care, home care, medical devices, and with a lot of experience in IV therapy. So we approach this with a great deal of cynicism and skepticism and scar tissue. But let's take a look at how we're viewing the opportunity. The future of healthcare seems to be, at least one of the big concerns is the nurse staffing crisis. And everywhere there are articles representing the economic and patient safety, patient satisfaction, nurse satisfaction aspects of healthcare. Recently, this has become the #1 health executive issue. For the last 16 years, it's been classified just as financial, and now it's about nurse staffing. So this is not about the bottom line only. This is about being able to cope with what is a chronic shortage of nurses. So the question here for the group is everyone else experiencing this as a major megatrend in healthcare? One of the questions here is there a difference between a nurse staffing shortage in an acute care environment versus home care? Anyone want to comment on the difference between those two and Is there a shortage in both? And if so, how are they different?
There's definitely a shortage in both. In the home infusion space, it's been difficult for even longer, I think, than it has been in the hospital situation, because you have to get skilled nurses who are also willing to, put in windshield time seeing patients. So there's a lot of inefficiency out there with respect to how few patients can be seen in a day when you have to travel from point to point.
Yeah, Rick, I see your hand is raised. Go ahead and jump in.
Yeah, I know a couple of nurses who actually migrated from the hospital space or the clinical space to the home space, but still have and they do struggle with some of the distances that we travel down here in South Texas. I mean, we've got a state that takes 3 days to get across it. So at highway speeds. So, and even just a part of that is a lot of driving, but we're still short on people for home visits and things like that.
Amazing. Edward, yeah, go ahead and jump in.
Thank you. The national healthcare worker shortage is really, really critical and much more severe than most people appreciate. According to U.S. Department of Labor statistics, as of, I believe, November 2021, we have had something like 15 or 17 straight months of record-breaking over 500,000 healthcare worker resignations. This is really terrifying because we graduate only 155,000 nurses a year in the United States. And with such a critical nursing shortage, you would think that the nursing schools will be increasing their enrollment. Unfortunately, because of the allure of the locum tenens nursing paying as much as $10,000 a week for an ICU nurse, there is now an even worse shortage of nursing instructors because they're leaving in droves to work in the traveling nurse space. And the cost of contract healthcare personnel for the first 3 quarters of 2022 amounted to $89 billion. So it is a huge problem.
Well,
It's cross country stock is
yeah.
not higher than
Yeah, if you look at how you could solve a nurse staffing crisis, there are 2 ways. One is what Edward just said, is let's look at the supply end of it. But the other side of that is, okay, with any given supply, how productive are they? How effective are they? So in order to do that, the first thing you've got to look at is where are they spending their time? And that's why I made the distinction between acute care and home care, because it's very different. The acute care nurse is trying to take care of 9 patients at once, and they're just frantic, right? Completely overloaded with patient ratios. Yet in home care, they've got the windshield time. Even if they're not in Texas, they can be in Rhode Island, and they're still driving a long time to get to a patient. But if you wanted to attack the process, it's not about how the nurse is acting, it's how the nurse is acting in a system. So if you want to attack the process, you have to look at it holistically. And the one thing we know is that this problem is not going to be solved with a product or one change in process. It must be solved by a change in looking at how the nurse interacts with pharmacy, EMR, all of these things, and very particularly look at how they're spending their time. So let's jump and look at another trend, and that is that healthcare costs are going up and up and up, and technology costs like televisions are going down, down, down. What do you think the core drivers are in this giant disparity between healthcare costs going up and consumer technology going down? What are the key elements that contribute to that disparity?
Probably the technology is not being applied to the healthcare
The
system.
availability of labor.
Well, and healthcare is a strange industry because it's not really elective. And so, you can choose to buy a TV or a cell phone, but when it comes to health, there's this strange driver of consumption and willingness to pay that is often, I don't want to say outside of control, but it's very different than any of these other things on the chart.
Well, Ross, the ability to pay and the awareness of paying are two different things, right? Because of the isolation that we get from insurance, you're not in touch with that. You're not making rational economic decisions. And as you know, or you may know, probably know, there are very popular common procedures that vary by a factor of 10 in pricing with no difference in quality, but a factor of 10 different in pricing because it's hidden from you and you make all kinds of assumptions. And so the free market's not really engaged so much in that. So the hiding of it, isolation of the economic decision and to the buyer is one element. And then the other, I would say, is the regulatory environment, that to the extent that you believe that the regulatory process is a hurdle, you'll do everything you can to avoid it, and you'll try to be grandfathered in as much as you can. And so in the space that we're in, the market-leading products were developed during the Carter administration, and they have not advanced because the threshold was so high to get a new FDA clearance that they wanted to stay in the oldest possible technology. So if you can cope with the regulatory process and you're not trying to maximize your revenue but get a very good fair return on it, the hope is that you can bend that curve and bring the cost way down. There are some good examples where prices have in fact come down dramatically. Look at LASIK surgery. That was very expensive, and now, 20 years later, it's far, far less expensive and frankly, far, far better. That's an example where it's almost followed, or it has followed, the kind of consumer trend. And that I think is possible in other fields as well. So let's take a look at what we're doing in particular. As I said, you can't solve the process with a product, right? You've got to really look at it holistically. And we're examining the problems with IV therapy in 3 buckets. The first one is the nurse productivity unit. If nurses spend a lot of time in medication administration management, and they do, and they spend a lot of time in infusion therapy, which they do, where are they spending their time? And if you analyze it with conventional pumps, they spend a lot of time on configuring the pump, programming, even mundane things like finding and disinfecting them, setting them up, managing the power. And they spend a lot of time on alarms, 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 and alarms. So there's a lot to work with here. And while you can't get rid of all those tasks, you can certainly shrink them by more than 50%. So here's an interesting way of looking at the mundane aspects of IV therapy interaction with nurses, cutting that workflow in half. The second one is, let's look at the process from a patient point of view. Patients make a journey through infusion therapy, might start in an ambulance, ER, OR, med-surg, MRI, ICU, step down. They're going to migrate through acute care, but then they get discharged and they go to home care or infusion centers. And the truth is, for a complex patient, they're going through this journey multiple times in multiple directions. And every time they do, if there's a handoff in technology, from a gravity drip to a syringe pump to a large volume pump to PCA to an MRI to home, ambulatory, every time they make a jump, it involves a whole element of risk and cost associated and hazard. And handoff is Latin for hazard and cost. And so we need to address that and try to figure out a way to eliminate those handoffs as the patient takes the journey. The next element is mobility. mobility is important for every patient. Even if they're not ambulatory, they still need to move. You could be a neuro ICU patient and still need to go down to surgery or radiology. So movement is important. So you got to pay attention to the physical layout, size, weight, power management, all of that stuff. You're all familiar with what a post-cardiac patient looks like with a Christmas tree of 2 IV pumps and a dozen things going off. The confusion of that is a real problem, but so is the mobility. So that's a central aspect to those 3 elements: nurse productivity, removing handoffs, and improving mobility.
Jeffrey, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, good. Was it you last week who mentioned that, I forget what the term was, the chronic condition of patients dying in the hospital and just nobody, they weren't in like ICU, they're just convalescing on a regular ward and they die in their bed and nobody knew that they were in arrest or anything? Was that you who mentioned
It
that?
wasn't me, but it's certainly true.
Rick, was it you? Somebody mentioned it.
Yeah.
Somebody mentioned failure to thrive, but that may have been an article I was reading.
Okay. I just, because of what you shared about the alarms and such, that's what triggered it. I'm like, I know this is a situation that we've yet to attack, and it sounds as though your technology would help in that regard.
Well, alarm management starts with reducing the need for alarms, right? It's not about how you move them around. You really just want to get rid of it. You don't get rid of the alarm, you get rid of the reason for the alarm. And that's a part of what we're doing. Breaking into a medical industry is difficult, especially one that's dominated by 5 global market leaders, right? It's a very quiet, strong oligopoly. There are 5 companies that manage it worldwide. So it's hard to break into it. But if you look at where we're positioned and just look at the 2 axes of nurse efficiency and patient mobility, the market leaders are all in a box. Certain of them have a little bit more mobility, but they're all very low in the nurse efficiency. They all utilize nurses in ways that are not related to patient care. 30-year-old platforms, lots of class 1 recalls. Everyone has been involved in 1 or more. The products don't fit universally, so there's a lot of handoffs involved. So the newest entry into that market, though, is Ivenix, which was acquired by Fresenius. They represent a significant improvement in nurse efficiency. They're winning every usability study out there, but they haven't really added much or helped at all in terms of their patient mobility. So, we're in the upper right part of this chart, our product at Numa, because I drew the chart, so I can put us anywhere we want. But the idea is that there's a lot of room for improvement in nurse efficiency and a huge room for patient mobility. And what's not shown on this is the fact that we can handle every single part of that patient journey without requiring a handoff. Same product, same architecture, all of that. So this is our positioning, and we know for sure that the nurse staffing crisis won't be solved by tweaking a 30-year-old approach.
Chris, I think your hand is raised. Oh no, we cannot hear you. I can hear your mouth moving. I don't know. Yeah, it looks like you're unmuted. Maybe if you want to drop the question in the chat, Joe can read it to us. I don't know.
Yeah, we can't hear Chris. We see his hand raised though.
Joe, do you have like a way to source questions, or is the chat the best place for that? Oh, you're muted too. But
Yes,
yeah.
I was. Yes, he can certainly write there. And as co-host, you can see them as well. In fact, I think every panelist can.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, no, when I'm sharing my screen, it's just a.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yay! I just had to play the settings. This is for Stephen real quick about, what nurses are forced to do above and beyond. A million years ago, I worked for BD and I had to take my wife to the ER for just a minor thing. And I could hear the nurse in the background trying to set up and give her an IV just for saline. And because I knew what the sounds of the buttons were on the pump, I could tell she was trying to get the rate started and it wouldn't work. And so I could just hear her going, damn it, damn it, damn it. And I kept hearing the button say no, the little failure alarm. And then I heard her go, God damn it. And she just powered it off, powered it back on, and then it worked. She goes, God, I hate these things. And then she got it to work and didn't realize that I was watching her like, oh my God, this is what they have to go through. I don't know if that's stuff that you guys hear about, but managing equipment that doesn't want to work right all the time, that must be a huge time suck for them.
One of the difficult things about trying to reinvent this field is that if you were to ask a nurse what's wrong with IV therapy, they have a hard time answering the question because they go to work every day coping. They're not going to work every day saying, what if, right? They're not doing that. They're going to work coping with what they've had to cope with for the last decades. So it's hard to get them to volunteer what would be an improvement. Yet if you watch them like you did, if you watch them, you'll know that they're doing a lot of things that are not related to patient care. So if you take a look specifically at what we're doing and compare it to a state-of-the-art smart infusion pump, the only breakthrough in infusion pumps in the last 20 years has been the evolution of smart pumps. They all have the same structure in place. They build in drug libraries for generic populations and they distribute that drug library to all the pumps. Well, there are quite a few studies that show that this really hasn't helped in patient safety. It sounds like such a great idea, but there are so many reasons why it doesn't work in practice. First of all, if I ask you what a safe dosage for sodium nitroprusside is, you'd say, well, for whom? Who are we talking about? What's their cardiac output? What's their kidney function? What other drugs are they on? All these other questions come up. So giving somebody a limit for a generic patient is going to, for that patient, by definition, be either too tight or too broad. And so there's constant overriding of these because the patient doesn't fit that profile, or because the nurse entered a drug that sounded a lot like the one that was prescribed, but wasn't the one prescribed. So there are many places where the system can fail to operate. But what we're doing is throwing away that model, which is from a kind of a system design point of view, right in the middle of the 1980s, pre-internet, distributed databases, all kinds of archaic structures. But what we're looking at more importantly is giving someone the chance to, with a tap, just touch the controller, the device with the prescription label, and have everything known about that, including patient-specific rate limits. So we are a smart pump for sure, but it's not by putting a drug library into the pump. Our pump will be as dumb as a rock. It won't know anything until you tell it something, and then it will know everything about the drug, concentration, everything, including the collection of subjective data and objective data from the nurse and patient. The next area is the one of most importance. By developing a closed loop flow control where we measure volume and flow and power, by measuring those things, you now see what's going on and you can report what the pump is actually doing. Today's 30-year-old architecture moves a motor and hopes for the best, moves a motor and hopes for the best, but it doesn't know what the actual flow is, doesn't know what the actual volume delivered is. It just moves a motor, hopes for the best. And so by being able to measure all that, imagine like cruise control in a car. You're setting the control. You don't need to tell it if you're going uphill or against a headwind. It measures the speed that you're going. It measures the power going to the engine. It knows how many miles you've gone. It's measuring all those things and can create a safe feedback control system. And that's what we do. So one result is that all the things that used to matter, like, oh, how high is the bed hanging? Or how long is the patient? Or how viscous is the fluid? Or any of that stuff doesn't matter anymore because the system is adapting and giving you what you want and reporting what you want in what ends up for us being a highly, highly simplified architecture. So simplified means cheaper, more reliable, easier to build, smaller, lighter. All those things happen when you build a closed loop control system. So consider us to be an MP3 player or an iPhone with phones in it, as opposed to a reel-to-reel tape deck. It's that kind of dramatic change in complexity and capability. And then we're not going to belabor the other elements, but there are a lot of differentiations here on things that really, really make a difference in workflow. So highly differentiated, but it's all based on the fundamental architecture of this closed loop control system. We are offering a lot, right? That last slide looked too good to be true. And you should expect everyone to think it's too good to be true. So rather than try to tell people what we're doing, our entire market plan is based on showing people what we're doing, having nothing to do with the pump, the IV set. That's not important. What matters is what did we get done for the nurse process. So as an example, if someone tried to describe to you how your iPhone worked, it would be impossible. It would be impossible to describe how it worked. But if you show someone taking a picture of a grandchild and emailing it to someone, they get that. So they get the output of it, they just don't get how it works. Similarly for us, we're working we will be, we're not on the market yet, we will be working with integrated delivery networks to create centers of excellence. And in that, we will be measuring the impact of our technologies. It includes obviously a new pump, but it includes much more than that. A whole new way of looking at cloud computing and packaging, every aspect of this, the way the device is carried about, the way it hangs on an IV pole, or if it does have an IV pole. All these things were rethought, but none of them matter until we can measure the output of what we're doing. So we will, in a highly controlled environment, kind of post-market surveillance on steroids, we will be measuring with actual patients and right next door to it in simulated environments showing things that are not yet cleared. So a continuous process improvement, looking at how we are affecting the IV process.
Chris, did you want to jump in again?
Yes, I just had a quick question because I was looking at your desire for cost control and all that. Are you implementing like a form of COQ, cost of quality in the process? Sorry, Jeffrey, you're muted.
Jeff, I was trying to find the person who was speaking out of turn, so I inadvertently clicked on yours. There you go. Thank you.
Jeff, you know what I'm talking about as far as measuring cost of quality.
Right. The details of how we're doing this Center of Excellence start with a robust study of the current practices. So we're going to be using every kind of quality tool and economic tool to establish a baseline and then record the changes. And this is related both to home care, or to all three: home care, acute care, and infusion centers. And so we're going to be doing this analysis from the viewpoint of the patient, not from the pump, not from a department, but from the patient's point of view, looking at all those economic elements. Ultimately, everything gets boiled down into some economic element. But as you know, everything we're talking about, every single thing we're talking about is related to patient safety. Everything. Last year, 22 or so hospitals had nursing strikes. Now, I've never heard of a nursing strike in my life, right? And last year there were 22 of them, and they were all related to nurse staff patient ratios. But the key here, from the nurse's vantage point, was about patient safety. They said we're engaged in there in activity that is simply not safe for the patient. So that all of this is economic, of course, has to be, we're starting out with a infusion technology that's dramatically less money, so that's a good thing to start with. But the pump cost is almost irrelevant. It's the process cost and availability of nursing that is driving the thing economically. The pump cost is nothing.
Jeff, I'm interested, it'd be helpful for the audience. How did you establish relationships for these centers of excellence? I mean, everyone who has a new technology would love to have a controlled study in a hospital. I worked with a company some years back, and yes, we're ready to start, then COVID hit and everything stopped, and they ran out of funds basically because they never got a chance to demonstrate their product. How did you set up? And I know you're very well established. Not everyone is. Not everyone has the reputation that you do. How much of it came down to how, the people you already know versus here's a fantastic technology and let's get it in your hospital system to test?
It's entirely related to the urgency of the problem. That I'll give you an example. The CEO of Cleveland Clinic spoke last month and said, if there's anyone out there that has any ideas at all about how to improve nurse efficiency, bring them to my desk. Okay. I mean, he was pleading that this is such an urgent issue. Please do that. Now, the good thing is that for a variety of reasons, there are now a couple dozen integrated delivery networks that have venture arms. And so they've created an environment where, boy, if you can bring the clinical horsepower, of a Cleveland Clinic or a Kaiser or HCA to bear and provide capital to support this kind of a structure, that's the best of all worlds, right? You're helping them operationally. You're going to give them a jump start and a first mover advantage. So finding hospitals that want to do it is not the big challenge. It's finding hospitals that want to do it and are willing to change. If you went into a hospital and nurses got all excited about doing this, but you had a recalcitrant IT department or pharmacy department that wouldn't think about changing their process, that can't work. You need to get senior management to say, we're going to change this process. And it doesn't mean that pharmacy might change. It means pharmacy will change. It doesn't mean IT might change. It means IT will change. And so finding that relationship is always tricky, but everybody's got the problem. And the cost of doing this is nothing in the scheme of things. What did Cleveland Clinic lose last year? Hundreds of millions of dollars related to contract nursing costs. Hundreds of millions of dollars. So putting this kind of a program together and studying it is a very, very low threshold.
Rick? Muted.
It's a good habit, just inconvenient to stay muted. But I was looking at some of the arguments that began about 6 or 7 slides ago, and I was thinking a big part of this is finding a way to make the argument. My sister is a nurse. My brother-in-law is a nurse supervisor, and in both of those things, and I've had the misfortune to have needed nurses and doctors on a variety of occasions, partially due to my mountain biking habit, and they're incredible people. They have high degrees of emotional empathy, including the male nurses. High tendency to adapt, which you discussed before. They're rule followers, which is good because our life depends on it. You don't want a nurse entrepreneur, right? And they're great observers, but not executives, even though they're making choices that our lives depend upon all the time. And when the few times when I've dealt in that capacity, I've wanted controls that were tactile and obvious because I was doing about 5 other things at once. And I think they probably even have bigger responsibilities than that, from what I understand. So the first question I had was, a lot of times I'm sure nurses are approached just as if you'd approach, some pointy-headed engineer like me or somebody who's an executive asking questions. And we always know we'll give you our 2 cents no matter what, right? Even if you don't want it. And But if you've got somebody who is strong in all of those traits and our lives depend on them being that way, the first question I had is, have we perhaps looked at a new way to ask questions of nurses so that it won't just be the one or two that have also trained themselves to think in some really different mental modes? And the other one is that very often you can get some great responses, but unless they're actually assembled in a way that is very authoritative to management and to some of the other pointed-headed people like IT folks and engineers like me, who often by our procedures and methods stand in the way of progress, is there a way or a discipline or an interface to help take these opinions and put them into something that is authoritative and recognizable as authoritative to the administrators and the bosses? So those two questions, can we ask them different questions? And can we find better ways to present their answers other than simply assembled responses to questions?
Well, over the years, we've conducted dozens of what we call clinical leadership seminars, where we bring nurses and anesthesiologists, pharmacists together. And if you start the meeting by saying, how's everything going in IV therapy? Oh, fine, everything's fine. You say, have you ever had an occasion to respond to a false alarm? Every hand in the room goes up. And have you ever had to look for an infusion pump? Have you ever wondered about whether it was disinfected? Have you ever managed a dead battery on a pump? And of course, they all start yelling at you. What are you, stupid? Of course we do that. And their anecdotes about all the issues don't go back a week or a month. They go back from the last shift. So it's difficult to get them to volunteer it, but we're going to be doing clinical observation studies where we are watching behavior, not asking anybody anything. We're watching behavior. And then when you show them an alternative approach, you then have to do what's on the slide, and that is quantify pharmacy, total cost of ownership, all those things. And if that becomes a compelling financial argument, and you show that you can reduce nurse work time by 35%, you'll get in administrative enthusiasm and executive leadership. But to Joe's point, finding a leader of a healthcare organization that recognizes this potential is important. Right? You can't convince them if they don't see the opportunity right now. Then you're probably not going to convince them with more data. So watch people instead of ask questions, and then provide the rigorous before and after study to show what you've done. So that is our approach. The one thing I'd like to touch on is, are there examples in healthcare that you can identify where disruptive technology has been adopted and things are much better than they were 20 years ago? There are other fields, IV therapy is not one of them, but are there fields that you can identify that have been dramatically improved?
Shopping for gas.
Are you thinking like robotic assisted surgery or things like that?
Well, maybe. That's kind of a category that sounds like it might improve, but I'm not sure that the data supports it. But I think that the one thing that's really magical, 21st century, is imaging. Right? You can go get an MRI or CT or anything, and your primary care doctor is going to have that information in seconds, and they're going to be able to playfully look at it and understand it. And that's totally different than it was 20 years ago. So I think imaging is really, really magical in terms of what we get and how we distribute the information. The democratization of it is really important. The other one I mentioned earlier, LASIK surgery is become so much more universally available and cheaper and better, and so that's a good example. Joe, what were you going to say?
Eddie wrote from pager to smartphone. I was going to say, I know, there certainly have been challenges with integrating things into electronic networks, but the shift to remote patient monitoring and monitors that send information to the cloud that can be pulled down relative to, transcription and things of that nature, the speed with which the information can be sent to the provider and the systems that are taking that data and presenting it in more useful interpretive information for the doctor is certainly transformative.
Joe, what about LabQuest or LabCore and Quest lab data now? You get it, and within days, you as the patient get all the information with the normal value. I mean, that exposure to patients is really phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal.
And one thing that you said, Joe, which struck me, was the using technology, right? The only thing that's enabled that transition to real-time data is technology. And when we see this trend of patients being cared for more in the home than in acute care, the literal only thing to enable that transition and still maintain that expected level of patient safety is technology, right? And if you use these conventional infusion pumps and you send it home, you have zero visibility into what's happening with that infusion, if it's occurring. I don't know.
No, I did that on purpose.
Oh, perfect. Oh yeah, no
I
worries.
wanted to just have us all look at one another now.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So it is important just to keep in mind why and how those things are happening, and they are supporting the trend.
Well, COVID was awful in most regards, but in terms of forcing virtual visits and all that stuff, that's not going away, right? That's been a big step forward caused by the pandemic.
Stanley, did you have something you wanted to add?
Sorry.
No? Eddie, you've been prolific on chat if you wanted to come off mute and share what you had.
Well, there really have been so many areas of technology advances that have made healthcare safer and better. And that it's almost too numerous to mention, but I think Jeff is very much on the right track. His project will bring a lot of much needed benefits. And there have been so many medication errors. I mean, get to the point where false alarms or even real alarms get so tedious that there's even a tendency to just ignore them. Or there are so many alarms going off, you don't know which one to attend to first. It is definitely a problem.
Jeff, do you have some strategic partners at this point with whom you're working, or kind of give us a sense of your funding situation? How long can you go and things of that nature?
We do. We partnered with a company in the Netherlands called MiniValve, because we recognized that control of complex fluid requires you to switch things. Start with this one, go to that one, go here, go there, go up, go down. So switching was an important part of controlling healthcare, kind of automating a stopcock, if you will. You need to be able to control that. So we co-invented some valves that control fluid flow pneumatically. Our pump happens to be fundamentally a pneumatic engine. There's no motors or gears or anything. It's all based on pneumatics. And these valves are as important as our flow control system is married with that. So MiniValve is a huge strategic partner. We also have a partnership with West Pharmaceuticals. West makes 40 billion drug vials a year. So they make 40 billion of these a year. Virtually every drug you've seen, every vaccine, every drug, comes in a vial, and it's likely to be made by them. Keep in mind that the drug that's in a vial has zero value until it's been delivered to a patient, and no value. There's no value at all when it's in that vial. So you've got to be able to get it out properly. You've got to be able to take. Let me give you one fun example. In home care, one of the most common anti-infectives is vancomycin. Well, today, patients at home, which could be a long drive from the pharmacy, getting vancomycin. Well, the pharmacist has to prepare that, dilute it, put it in a bag, label it, refrigerate it, ship it, get it to the patient. And in that whole period, that patient has to use it within 8 days. Okay, well, that's challenging, right? The logistical challenge. Well, what if you could take lyophilized drug, powdered drug in a vial with a shelf life of 5 years, ship it with normal saline at room temperature, shelf life of 5 years, click the two together like a Keurig machine, and all of a sudden the drug was reconstituted, diluted, and delivered untouched by human hands. That would be a workflow improvement that would be so dramatic, and yet it involves the things I'm talking about: closed loop flow control, measuring volume, measuring flow, bidirectional flow, all of that. But that one example in one venue, one drug at home, is a very, very big market opportunity. And I could go on every single department, whether it's labor and delivery or MRI or the ER, all of them have special requirements that can be done in this, and the opportunity is there to do it. So what does that require? Clinical collaboration, partnering with an integrated delivery network that cares about the patient journey. And it's a big opportunity, but we're going to crawl, walk, run to get there.
When you held up the vial, I immediately thought of our friend Sue. She is a pharmacist, and her technology is around ampoules. And I have to wonder if there could be some kind of synergy with the work that you're doing.
Yeah.
So would you just tell them a bit, maybe off you, but I just see a possibility.
I totally get what you're talking about. Vanco actually, you can order it in 1 gram and 2 gram bags that have a longer expiration as long as you keep it in the fridge. But I understand the value of sending a powder and the saline solution. And I know that the Alaris pumps suck. And if it's a non-standard solution, no, you can't really put it through the pump because it's only set for standard solutions to avoid errors. So I really appreciate what you're doing and allowing, to give back some time to the nurses. What we've done to give back time to the nurses is the current process for filtering ampoules requires multiple needles and multiple needle exchanges and steps, which can lead to glass shard contamination to the bloodstream or increased risk of needle stick injuries. So we built an all-in-one package, 1 needle filter device that's basically safer and easier and greener and takes half the time, which will improve the healthcare system and make life easier for both the nurse and the pharmacist. So I'm not sure if there is any synergy, but you never know. We are just a couple of months away from FDA submission. So, and we're watching clinical trials next week with nurses and with pharmacy staff.
Joe, can you make sure we get connected?
Yes, I certainly can.
Well, congrats, Sue. Good luck in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, congratulations. That's great.
Yeah, I think we have 2 raised hands. Chris, if you want to go first.
Thank you. Jeff, that just kind of made me think of something. If there were drugs that were shipped to patients at home that say they had a special device that mixed it and set it so that it was proper delivery, that sounds to me like potentially could eliminate a lot of drugs that somehow, people get drugs shipped to their home, it gets stolen off their porch, you know what I mean? And then it gets sold somewhere. But if they got what you're talking about shipped to their house and someone stole it, it would be useless to them. You see what I mean? I think you could eliminate a lot of drug theft that ends up either people OD on it or it's illegally sold because it would be useless to them unless they had the device to properly mix it. I like that idea.
Good.
Awesome. Go ahead, Edward. Or did Joe call you Eddie before?
Thank you. So I do see ways by which your system could be incorporated into Jeffrey's platform, because so many drugs need to be stored in glass ampoules to preserve their potency. It wouldn't be too difficult to design that pump in such a way that, if the patient were to need, let's say 3 vials or 4 vials of these drug, that it would extract that and filter out the glass shards automatically.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to take a run at it. So Sue and I will get together and we'll figure out if there's an opportunity there.
Yeah, there's also drugs. you know, it's been a few years since I've been in practice, but I know that there's some drugs that used to have to start at some rate for the first hour and then lower it for another 8 hours and then increase it to that rate, especially some of the hypothermic protocol medications and some of the medications for blood clots. So yeah, I think there could be some synergy, and I'd love to talk with you.
Can I tell you that as much as I enjoyed Jeff's presentation and learned from it, these last 3 minutes make these weekly calls so satisfying for me. While you guys were talking, I sent Sue your contact information. I sent Miranda and Jeff Sue's information. So I'd love some business babies to come out of our little project today. Eddie, you still have your hand up. Did you need anything else, or Elizabeth? Both of you on mute?
Yes.
You
Okay.
on mute.
Hi.
Sorry, I forgot to lower my hand.
Okay. Elizabeth?
So I did so I'm working on a communication system with using IV tubing. So there's lots of synergies, and I did bench testing to this week, and I'm sitting in my office. I have the BD Alaris pump. I have a B Braun pump, because we were using these pumps that are standard just to do bench testing on our little communication tool that we have that attaches to IV tubing. So it's not about the pump, it's about the tubing. And so when you were talking about these pumps, I thought I rented these pumps so I could use them for the testing. And I thought, wow, wouldn't it be great to have your pump that we could also test in our bench testing?
The answer is
Communication.
yes, I've already sent you her information as well.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I'm very, very interested in that, because, yes, very interested in that. Thank you.
Well, and likewise, as a matter of fact, I'm about to purchase a pump to give to our manufacturer for them to use when they're manufacturing our product, to just do periodic testing. So I think I should talk to you before I buy their pumps. Yeah.
I'm on it.
All right, good, very good. Thank you, everybody. It really great
This is
interaction. I
incredible.
really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Know
you.
your magic.
Next week, if I'm not mistaken, because I know who's speaking, but he could speak on so many topics. I believe that we're going to talk about solutions around sepsis. So that could be interesting as well. And when we all approach it from all of our different disciplines, maybe we'll have some of those connections like we did today. So apologies for technological difficulties and hanging up on people and removing videos and the like, but wasn't it all worth it,
Oh my
little
gosh.
family? I'll see many of you in person in 5 weeks. And for those of you who can't make it, of course, I'm recording everything. And the Friday, let's see, that would be the 14th. This session will be just a recap of what you missed. So if you can't be there in person, we'll cover a lot of that.
Thanks, everybody.
Make it a
Thank
great
you.
weekend. All
Thank
right.
you, everyone.
Bye
Bye-bye.
for now.